Sit down and listen up, because today we're talking strategy. So, if you've taken a 4th grade science class, you know that light is literally the reason that we can see the world around us. If you didn't know this, 1, you're way too young to be watching this video, and 2, get back to online class or I'm calling your mum. Light in art, however, is a little different to light in the real world. You have to be a little more strategic in choosing the right lighting setup, which not only helps the story but also is very flattering to your character. While there are probably a million different ways that you can set up your lighting for your painting, today I'm going to share with you my 5 main steps on how I use lighting to turn my portrait from this to this. So if you're excited for this video, then give me a big thumbs up, hit that subscribe button down below, because next week may or may not be a style study. Just throwing that out there. But for now, let's look at my 5 main steps to painting better light. So, like I've said in the intro, there are loads of amazing ways in which you can light your scene. It generally all depends on your storyline and the kind of mood that you're trying to set. However, I found that I always come back to these 5 key steps no matter what I'm painting. Now, I usually paint semi-realistic fantasy character art, so a lot of my work is inspired by real-world lighting, but on steroids. That's how I like to put it. However, these steps are general enough that you can mold them into your own style, whatever that may be. And today we're going to be painting Virgo, which is the 6th sign of the zodiac, as part of my Dark Astrology series. Alright, let's dive in. So here, as you can see, I have a sketch and have blocked everything in with a dark cyan. The very first thing we're going to do is work with the ambient light. As the name suggests, this is the most diffuse light that naturally occurs around us, kind of the light you'd see on an overcast or cloudy day. It is soft and flat and determines the general value scale. We're going to use some midtones and shadows to indicate the overall form and texture. I usually like to work with bright orange and dark cyan and then color adjust, though you can totally do this step in black and white and then add color. In fact, this is what we're doing on our portrait project over on Patreon, and I'm actually really enjoying the Art and Chill series on there. By the time you're watching this, there's over 3 hours of tutorial / paint with me content on there. So if you want to hang out and paint together every Friday, I really encourage you to check it out. But in either case, for our first step, we're aiming to just really clarify the form and structure of everything, basically just taking it from a flat sketch to a 3D scene. Pretty much the only shadows you should think about at this stage are the ambient occlusion shadows. So off camera, I've now gone in and flattered some colors in. Once I'm happy with how the colors are looking, I'm going to go ahead and flatten the layers. Now I'm going to go in and paint over this layer, just making sure nothing looks too flat or too dull. But still bearing in mind that we're trying to stay in the mid to mid dark range of values. No extreme values just yet. And I've gone ahead and given the same treatment to the background as well. Now this is where we introduce some of the more extreme values. Your key light is your brightest, most powerful light source, and is a really good opportunity to throw in some much needed drama. Personally, I really love it when the key light comes from above the character, kind of like when you have a super bright beam of sunlight. This really makes me think of Baroque art, like the works of Caravaggio and Rubens. There is something so poetic to me about a very strong key light coming down from the heavens, basically creating a spotlight on the focus of the painting. It's just very magical and I love it, and I'm gonna paint all of my characters to have it because I don't understand moderation. Now, obviously, your key light can come from any source and any direction, but there are a few standard scenes that you can create just by moving the key light and changing the color of it. If you create a warm key light that comes from slightly above one side of the character, you get dramatic Rembrandt lighting that is said to be the most flattering for portraits. If the light is bright and comes directly from the side of the character, the other half of their face is usually in shadow, creating a very strong two-faced type of imagery. Think Mulan when she wiped half of her makeup off. Honestly, drop the link to that makeup remover, sis, because I need it. But that's kind of the vibe I get from half and half lighting like this one. If you place the key light to come from in front of and below the character's face, it feels more horror vibes. Think holding a flashlight below your chin while you tell scary stories around a campfire. Personally though, my favorite lighting setup is the butterfly light. You place a strong key light above and slightly in front of the character. This causes a butterfly-shaped shadow under the nose. Like I said, this feels very Baroque to me and I love it. No matter what key light you choose though, this is where you throw in your brightest highlights. However, you want to avoid going in with straight white and painting over your character because that can look very chalky and dull. Instead, I highly recommend creating a new layer and setting it to overlay mode and painting your key light in that way. Because not only does overlay brighten everything up more evenly, it also saturates some of the midtones. Obviously, use your visual judgment, and if you find that painting directly with a bright tone works with your style, do that. Always go with your own instinct. If you're looking for a more subtle key light, you can even play with a soft light blending mode, which doesn't make the values quite so much brighter, but does still saturate them. It's like overlay minus the lightening effects. Another important part of this step is to place your drop shadows. Since the ambient light is soft and diffused, we haven't had any major shadows so far. However, because the key light is A, more powerful and B, generally narrower focused, it will cast drop shadows both on and around your character. In fact, your character themselves will create a drop shadow on the environment. So you can do this with a new layer set to one of the darkening blending modes such as multiply. Remember, however, that warm lights generally cast cool shadows and vice versa, so make sure your shadows have a tint to them and aren't straight up black because that really flattens everything. So here's a before and after for the key light. Hopefully you can tell just how dramatic the difference is. This is the bit that a lot of early stage artists tend to ignore. I say that because that's exactly what I've done for most of my art career so far. Bounce light, as the name suggests, is the light that bounces off an object onto another object. You've probably seen this if you've worn a bright red top and gone out into the sun and noticed how the light bounces off your top, causes your entire neck to glow red. So, as you can guess, the bounce light is way more subtle than the others so far, but it is also 100% dependent on your environment, because the light has to literally bounce off of other objects and then hit your character. The color of it is always the color of the object that is bouncing off of. One amazing standard bounce light to throw in is from the sky. So you grab the color of the sky and softly airbrush it at the edges of your character that directly face the sky. Again, remember that this is very subtle because when light bounces off of an object, it is way weaker and way more diffused. Another great bounce light comes from the ground itself, especially if there's a lot of foliage around. Although the bounce light isn't as widespread or as intense as your ambient and key lights, it has a very important function. Bounce light really helps to stitch the character into the scene around them. Without the bounce light, it's almost as if the character is completely unaffected by the scene, and it makes the character look like a cardboard cutout that has been pasted into a random environment. You want your scene to tell a story, and you want to make sure the character is an active part of the story. I actually love throwing in the bounce light just at the outermost edges where you would see shadow or ambient occlusion. On the rest of the character, the bounce light can be drowned out by the ambient or key lights, so the only place where this softer, weaker light would be visible is where there are no other competing light sources. And that is in the shadows. Your bounce light is basically Hades, king of the shadow realm. This is our final light source. Don't worry, there is still a fifth step, but as far as light sources are concerned, a backlight or rim light is usually the very last light source that I like to paint in. In the last step, we found a way to really push the character into the scene, right? However, we don't want the character to completely blend into the environment around them. So here we're going to balance this out by making the character stand out a little more using a rim light. I feel like this is the fun, sexy light source that everyone loves painting in, because what you're essentially doing is grabbing a bright, high saturation color and outlining some of the character's edges. Notice how I said some of the character's edges. That's because we need to remember that this is a narrower light source. In fact, think of it as a skinny key light. It still creates some super bright highlights, but it only comes from one direction. If it comes in from directly behind the character, it will only show up as a rim on the outer edges of the character. If, however, it is a rim light that comes in from one side, it will only light up that specific side. So when it comes to adding a rim light, make sure you remember that it is still a light source and it is going to function like any other light source, and it will cause ambient occlusion and drop shadows. One key tip with this one is to use a line art brush. You want this light to be opaque, and you definitely want it to follow the contours of the edge while also having a variable line width. A good line art brush will have all of these characteristics built in, so it's always a really good bet for this kind of thing. So here's a before and after for this step. The final thing you want to keep in mind is that light doesn't just affect the character. It has a massive impact on the background, and any other elements you may have in your painting need to be given the same color and light treatment as you've given your character. So here you've seen me throw in some ambient lights, the main key light and the rim light on all the surrounding elements. Also remember that the character themselves also affect the lighting. So if you have any light sources on the character, such as glowing elements, those will also cast a glow on the surroundings depending on how powerful they are. Plus, like we saw in the key light stage, the character casts a drop shadow as well, so make sure to throw that in, if it would be visible in your scene, of course. But the very final step I like to do with every single painting is to add some scattered specks of light. I mentioned this in my video about finishing steps, but this is a step I really use and abuse, because it instantly adds so much movement to the painting. Because when you see floating specks of light, it indicates either a breeze or that a bunch of dust has been disturbed by the character or some other living being. Plus, floating specks also add much needed smaller elements, which nicely balance out the bigger ones that we've painted in. So here's the finished painting. This is Virgo, a mutable earth sign and the second largest constellation in our sky. It is the symbol of harvest and fertility and is often connected to practical sensibility and is symbolized by the maiden, grains, and plants. However, when it goes dark side, Virgo can be critical and self-righteous, honest to a fault, and downright fussy. It is also linked to Astrea, the Greek goddess of justice, who was said to be the last of the immortals on the earth. The story goes that at the end of the Silver Age, she was so disgusted by humans and their terrible deeds, she left the earth and chose to live in the sky as a constellation, Virgo. In Egyptian lore, the qualities of Virgo are attributed to the goddess Aset, also known as Isis, and her brother Set. The story goes that Set, once enraged by Set's husband Osiris, killed Osiris. In a frenzy of mourning, Set, or Isis, who is the goddess of fertility, tried her very hardest to bring him back to life, and this is symbolized by wheat growing from Osiris's sarcophagus in ancient Egyptian carvings. Here I've tried to capture all of this into this painting. I've shown her as this larger-than-life deity. She is pregnant to indicate fertility, but does not wear a wedding band. This has dual symbolism to me. One is that she does not need a male consort in order to create life, and the second is the story of Isis, who lost her husband to her brother's wrath. In this scene, you see mortal men offering her gems and silver jewelry, but being in her dark form, she is not impressed at all and is stubbornly refusing to accept any of it. Plus, the parts where her body touches the earth instantly sprout trees and grains, which I think adds a cool little touch. Virgo is ruled by Mercury, so I've also got the planet up in the background. And finally, there's a little Easter egg in there, and I'm interested to see if you guys can spot it. Again, the entire speed paint from start to finish is available on Patreon, along with some literal movie-length tutorials every week. So make sure you check that out at patreon.com/SrishCreates or click the link in the video description below. See, I told you it would be a strategy sesh up in here. But if you've enjoyed this video and found it helpful, then let me know by giving me a thumbs up and letting me know by dropping a comment below. Hit that subscribe button because, like I said before, next week may be a cell study and it may have been chosen by my patrons. Just gonna put that out there. So if you'd like to help pick out future content for this channel, check out my Patreon. The link is in the description. But with all that said, thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I hope you've enjoyed it as much as I have. Check out some more videos up here and I'll see you guys on the next one. Bye.